everyone, and welcome today to Dead to Rights, the podcast video for the crime genre industry. We've got a little bit more serious topic today. I'm your host, Donna Carrick, and today we'll be speaking with an author by the name of Lynn Hesse. And Lynn is a former law enforcement officer who was with the force 25 years and headed up a mobile unit that was specializing in helping with domestic situations under the Janet Reno model. So you're going to want to hear what she has to say. She does indicate that many of the crimes that she was called out to did involve either mental illness or domestic violence situations. So the cause of stopping domestic violence is one that is very close and very dear to her. Her three titles are Another Kind of Hero, Me Too, which is a book of short stories, and Well of Rage. So look for those by Lynn Hesse. Now, speaking of collected short stories, we have an anthology coming out from Carrick Publishing in the fall of 2020 titled A Grave Diagnosis, and that is 35 tales of murder and malaise. And that book is being dedicated to the heroes on the front line of this 2020 pandemic. And these would be the medical workers, the doctors, the nurses, the paramedics, the hospital staff, cleaning crew, people who feed you when you're in the hospital, as well as people who are in essential services, who keep things like the food, everyone from the farmers to the transportation people, to the people who service the transportation industry. All of these essential workers. And I think of them all because our oldest son was working throughout this pandemic in an industry that was considered an essential service because it serviced the transportation industry. So these are the sideline heroes that we don't even think about, but they are needed, and they were needed even at the height of this crisis. Our oldest son, Tom Kaz, had to work every single day, and we thank him for his work and for doing everything he could to stay safe and to not bring the virus home to his family. And to all of these essential workers, we thank you. And this book is going to be dedicated to them. So watch for it to come out in the fall. It's titled A Grave Diagnosis. And now, please give a big Dead to Rights welcome to author Lynn Hesse.
Hey.
Oh, hi, Lynn. Welcome to Dead to Rights. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Good stuff. And no technical issues. You've obviously used Zoom before, have you?
I have, and my husband's a photographer, so he's got me all lit up. And
oh, I can see that. You look wonderful. Yeah. A lot of people don't know how to use the lighting, and it's so nice when I see somebody come through with good clarity. So thank your husband on my behalf, will you?
I will. His name is Dean, by the way.
Thank you, Dean.
I don't hear my southern accent, but that may be part of the problem.
Oh, it's probably my northern accent, isn't it? We're in different parts of the world. Tell us where you are.
Well, I'm in Stone Mountain, Georgia, which is outside of Atlanta, about 30 minutes.
Oh, Atlanta. Wonderful, wonderful part of the world. Yes. But you've had your difficulties recently, too, with this pandemic, haven't you?
Yes, it has spiked again in this area, and I've been making masks for the community, and I've lived in the same community for, well, before I became a police officer. So, you know, a lot of these people are struggling financially, and so anyway, I started making masks, and I just got some more orders because people are getting very concerned about their children going back to school and so forth.
Yeah, exactly. And if you've got a situation where the community is already struggling financially, they're not going to be able to afford disposable masks either, are they? That is part of the problem.
Yeah, and I think the cloth masks breathe a little bit better, and they're more comfortable.
They do.
Yeah, I think it works better.
Yeah, and you can have more fun with them. I made a few myself for the family here.
Yeah.
You can have a little bit of fun with them. I mean, you know, there's no law that says you can't have a little fun now and again.
That's right. You can make them all sorts of colors, and I have a lot of material left over. I used to have a fabric art business many years ago before I started writing seriously.
Did you? What kind of things did you sell?
Well, it was mostly my sister quilts these beautiful quilts. I mostly did a little quilting, but I mostly made purses and, you know, casserole carrot, just whatever, you know, notion, you know, that I came up with, yoga bag carriers, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as another fabric art lover, I welcome you to Dead to Rights. Definitely. One of these days we're going to get on Zoom so you can show me some of your work. I would love that. Yeah. Now, I promise we'll talk about your books, but
Okay.
before we do, tell us a little bit about your 25 years on the police force.
Okay, well, after my first marriage collapsed, I had been interested in, I actually did a ride along as one of my college courses, and had rode along with a couple of women in Indianapolis, Indiana, police women. And I thought, you know, I could do that. I would think that would be really a lot of, you know, I could do that. I can handle crisis. I'm good in a crisis. I could do that. You know, I would like that. So, of course, my husband at the time was totally negative about that whole situation. But anyway, as I came back to Atlanta, I went through a couple of jobs, but then I hooked up with Georgia State University, which they have state officers. And I was there a couple of years. I was a single parent at the time. And I hooked up with them. And then I found out that I could go to DeKalb County. And I had a friend, an acquaintance through work who said, you know, you could do it. Another female. And I was concerned about, you know, how I was going to do shift work with a child. But anyway, I got on there, and it was one of the toughest places to get on. And they didn't have any women. They had women in the streets only a couple of years, and not very many. And my class was the first class where affirmative action apparently had kicked in, and a third of the class were women.
Okay.
And so when I came on, they did not want us in the streets, and they made that quite clear. But we persevered, and I was part of the group who made sure that the first 5 women that got rank, unfortunately we had to sue because they wouldn't give them rank just based on their test scores and their evals. So we had to actually take them to court, but that happened in 1986.
Wow. So you were really another trailblazer. And, you know, we heard about the trailblazers at the beginning of the 1900s. We heard about the trailblazers at the end of the 1800s. And again in the 60s. And it just never ends, does it? It's
no
end trail blazing.
and still today, you know, I
look backwards sometimes. I'm sorry, Lynn, but we go backwards sometimes.
I know. And I am so concerned for the young women having the same choices and opportunities that my generation worked really hard to make sure they would have.
Yeah.
I hope, you know, I talk to some young women, and I feel very positive that they are right on top of everything. And then there's other women who just are clueless. You know, they
don't get that it's in their hands. That's what it is a lot of the time. I'm sorry, and I'm not blaming the victim here. I know that the deck is stacked. It has always been stacked. But you have got to point out that the deck is stacked. You've got to speak plain, don't you?
Yeah, I think the word feminism, you know, has gotten a bad rap. And I know that I had several conversations with my adult daughter about that. I think her opinion has changed through the years. But when she was a teenager, she felt like it was one of those obsolete words that we didn't need anymore, and associated with the B word. And so, you know, and this was a child that I raised, you know, as a police officer going to work. And I was just like, well, where are you coming from?
But she came around, did she? That's so good.
Yeah, I think she gets it now. She's, you know, had to work many years in human resources. And I think she gets it now, yeah.
Yeah, we've got 2 sons, and I would say that they are both, if not flat out feminists, then at least I would call them very progressive. And we've got 1 daughter who has been, I would say, I don't think I've ever heard her use the word feminist, but challenge her, I dare you. You know? She's very strong-minded. She turns 18 this week, and she is very strong-minded and has always been, and I'm very proud of her. And you know, we've got to allow this within women. And I think part of the problem, not to hijack everything, but part of the problem is that there are so many isms, and they are all important. They are all important. One doesn't detract from the other. But when I think about women's struggles, we are 52% of the world's population, and yet our ism gets backburnered every time there's the slightest excuse.
I agree. And that's one of the reasons I wrote my books.
Yes, let's get on to the books. Absolutely. You've got another kind of hero. You've got, there's a collection of short stories called Me Too. And we're going to start with that one, I think. But then you've also got Well of Rage, and we'll come to each of those. But let's start with Me Too. Tell me a little bit about that collection.
Well, I had written a short story called Jules Hell, I don't know, many years ago. And I couldn't get it published because it was definitely about domestic violence, and it was gritty. You know, there's my first book, Well of Rage, is a police procedural, and I don't think it's over the top with language or anything, but because my rookie cop is got a religious background, and she's quite naive when she first starts out. Mm-hmm. But you'd be surprised how the church ladies patted my knee and said, you know, I really loved your book, but you just need to cut out that language. Mm-hmm. So, but you know, when you have drug dealers and people who you are arresting that in your book, people who are trying to commit murders, then, you know, there is some language there, a little bit of language. So it's interesting. But anyway, to get back to Me Too, I had written this short story, and I am a member of the Sisters in Crime in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. And Elizabeth Zelvin is also a member of Sisters in Crime. And of course, she's out of New York City. Mm-hmm. And so she put out a call for manuscripts dealing with violence to women. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I'm going to resurrect that short story. So I got it out, edited it again. You know how you edit it 1,000 times. Yes. You know, and sent it off to her. And in 24 hours, she wrote me back. I was like, whoa, you know, because usually you wait for weeks. Yes. And she wrote me back. She said, I want the story, but you're just going to need a little editing. Mm-hmm. If you ever work with Elizabeth Zelvin, a little editing, it means a lot of editing. Okay. But anyway, we went through back and forth and produced what is now in this collection, Me Too, short stories and anthology. Mm-hmm. And so we had a New York launch. I got to go up to the Mysterious Bookstore in New York City. That was a lot of fun. And I had, you know, and so that was a big deal. We had a New York launch, and that's my first and only. And, you know, I took my husband with me, and so that was, you know, she did a great job of introducing us, and we had a little reception afterwards and all of that. So I'm really proud of that. And during that whole development of finding Level Best Books, actually, you know, published the book. Proud of that. Very, you know, very supportive of women writers. And so during that whole process, I have a connection with the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence. So I developed this panel because I'm also a performer. I had a performer, had a poet, I had another lady who had written a book who I knew through the Atlanta writers. And this was a nonfiction book about domestic violence. And then this book of short stories. Mm-hmm. And so we raised money for the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And we had this big deal one night at the Decatur Library. Excellent. So that was my big deal last year, was to promote the short stories and to raise money for, you know, the Georgia Coalition. So anyway, that was a lot of fun.
Now, you threw away a little word there. You said you're also a performer.
I am. I have a dance background, and I actually taught sacred dance for over 20 years while I was also a police officer and getting a
Mm-hmm.
degree. You know,
Mm-hmm.
amazing kids, you might as well do, you know, a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I'm a performer, and I took that after I quit doing the sacred dance, you know, 3 times a week with
Mm-hmm.
2 different classes. I decided I would take it out into the secular world. And I had some connections in Decatur, and I was on the Beacon Dance Board.
Mm-hmm.
And so I dance with them. I dance with Interplay,
Mm-hmm.
which is a national, international organization where it's an improv group, and you use movement and storytelling
Mm-hmm.
and a little bit of vocalization, I guess you call it.
Mm-hmm.
And I have learned a lot because I was very structured up to that point in my performances. So now I can kind of wing it, you know,
Uh-huh.
if I have to.
That's so funny, Lynn, because a very dear relative of ours has spent her life in dance, and always on an amateur level, but she has loved dance study, and she studied it all her life, and she's now around 75 and still studies dance and still dances. And there's something, you're sitting down, but there's something in the movements. I'm not going to pretend I would have guessed it when you're sitting down, but when you say it, I can see it. Something in the movements that is elegant, even the way you use your hands and everything.
Well,
And she does the same thing, so I recognize that. Yeah.
thank you. You know, it's harder and harder the older you get, but I feel like that, you know, if I can't dance, I would be very unhappy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Movement's very important to me, and so
Yes.
yeah, it's a big part of my life. But I have to tell you, I'm also a member of the Dancing Flowers for Peace. I must tell you that.
What is that? Say that again.
Well, we're women over 50, and some
Mhm.
of us have had dance backgrounds, some of us don't. All, you know, one of our members just retired from the CDC.
Mhm.
We have 3 leaders, and one of the leaders is Leslie Friedman. I think she's listening. And then we're very fortunate to have the director of dance at Emory University as
Mhm.
one of our leaders. And then we have a lady called Noelle Martz, who does all of the administration kind of things, make sure we know when we're supposed to meet and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And anyway, it's a great group of gals, and we dress up. I'm the dandelion. We make our own costumes,
Oh,
and we dance for peace anywhere, any place, anytime. You want us, we do.
oh, wonderful, Lynn. How wonderful. What a great sidetrack from books. That is just wonderful. Now we do have to talk about your books. Can you tell
Okay.
me about Well of Rage? What was the stimulus that inspired you to write that?
Okay. Well, I was still working when I started. I had been journaling, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and had written a few things here and there. But I decided that I really, I'd always wanted to spend more time dancing and
Mm-hmm.
more time writing. And so I started, and with one of the main purposes was to show that a female police officer polices differently, and
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion, better,
Mm-hmm.
in the fact that we use interpersonal skills. We don't go for violence first.
Mm-hmm.
We try to understand what's going on underneath this anger, this yelling, this screaming, whatever's going on, and we bring that to the job.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to be taught that. Most of us do not have to be taught that.
Mm-hmm.
And as you can tell, with all of the violence and all of the the cultural movement right now, Black Lives Matters, and the hostility towards police officers because of all of these unnecessary deaths, improper use of force, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
that it's very necessary in the reformation of the police department to value women's opinion and
Yes.
to listen to them when they tell you how you need to be trained.
Yes. Yes. I really strongly believe that every pocket of our society is a community within its own right. And in every community, you need balance. Every community, whether it's the police community, and believe me, when we need the police, we regard them very highly. you know? So let's be plain on that. But the police community requires balance, just like every other community, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. I mean, we're not like some group of people that have taken from, some alien universe. We come
No,
from the population,
that's
general
right.
population. So we come in with all of the flaws and all of the bias that everybody else has in this world. And so to police fairly, it does take a very ethical, moral person who's willing to look at all of that about themselves.
Hmm.
So this requires mental health facilities. There's just a lot of, I could talk forever. But anyway, one of the reasons I wrote Well of Rage was because I wanted to show there's a character in the book who's a veteran officer, male, and he pretty much loses it throughout the book.
Hmm.
And that was one of the reasons I wrote the book, was to show how the pressures of the job can change you and how your mental health can go down the drain.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, my character Carly Redmond is the target of some of his violence and his hatred and sexism. So she goes through. She's really young. He is her training officer, and she's very young and she's very naive, but she perseveres, and she actually uncovers and uncovers some bones and well, and she also finds out that there is a lot of that the police department has not done their job, and that this is a cold case that must be solved for her to bring closure to the family and also to save her job. So that was the first book, and I wrote it because I wanted people to see that we're all human and that females do track differently when they go through the experience, and they are treated differently by their peers.
Yes.
And they had that added pressure beyond all the other pressures that a normal police officer would have.
Yeah. And thank you. Thank you for having done this job for so long, and for having represented women on the force. I really appreciate that, and I'm sure many listeners will. Then you followed up with another kind of hero. Is that right?
Yes, well, because the first book was so heavy for me to emotionally to write. I mean, I really had to write it the first time and kind of like, this guttural thing that just sort of came out. Then I had to go back and write it from a little bit of a distance and perspective. And I found that I needed to write something with a little more humor. And so I come from a small town in Missouri called Webb City. And I have this Midwestern background, small town. I know what people are like. My family have lived for a long time in Forsyth, Georgia, which is about an hour and a half away from Atlanta south. And I've never lived there because I got married early the first time, but very familiar with how life works down there. So I set that book in Forsyth, and it's close to the state training center for public safety people. And so that was part of it. So I actually used some of the locations that are in Forsyth.
Right.
And I have a sister. She's a year younger than I am. And we're very different, as sisters tend to be.
Yes.
And so that was part of it. That was the first little hint that I was going to write something about that. And I was just having coffee at the table one day, and I was thinking about how different we were, and also thinking about how my mother had told me the story not too long before she died, about the fact that she was at her little country church off of Johnsonville Road, off of I-75, and I guess it was a Wednesday night prayer meeting or whatever, some kind of service or something, and they had the door open. And we're talking a very small church, maybe 50 members total. And this biker came by, and he had full leather gear and a ponytail and red hair. And he came in, and he said, I just felt the presence of the Lord here, and I wanted to come in and see if I would be welcomed along with my African-American girlfriend. She happens to be a truck driver, by the way. And so mother was getting tired. She had Parkinson's, and she had been driven there by a friend, and they got up to leave and left him there talking to the minister. Well, they got about halfway home, which would have been maybe 5 minutes down the road. And their imagination went crazy, and they said, you know, he could be a killer. He could be killing the preacher right now.
Oh, dear.
So Julie dropped my mother off at the house and said, I'm going to go back and check on the minister. So the story goes that she drove back, and this is like a dirt road that crosses this little Johnsonville road, which is paved, but it's 2-lane. And there's old buildings sitting on each corner, and one of them happens to be a stone building that was built in 1932. It was an old post office. She drives her car around, and she parks where she can see the motorcycle and the church, thinking she can't be seen. And I guess by this time it was getting dark. And she's peering around, and the guy comes out, gets on his motorcycle, and it lights her right up, you know, I don't know what Julie was thinking she could do, because Julie was in her 70s then, but you know, whatever. So the story was so delightful. And oh, by the way, he turns out to be a Rhodes Scholar in religions, this guy.
Okay.
So I just loved the story. So my image of what this man looked like and what, you know, personality-wise, this becomes my undercover DEA agent.
Okay.
Then the story of another kind of hero.
I love that. I love the way that we do use the characters that we know. That is just such a wonderful story, honestly, of misperceptions. And it's so easy to make misperceptions, and to add the humor, the whole physicality of the fellow with his motorcycle and his red hair and his ponytail and his girlfriend who's a truck driver. And wow, I really like that. And that's called Another Kind of Hero. So he's an undercover, is he? He's an undercover?
He is undercover DEA.
And what's his name?
Okay, Blackwell, Dewey Blackwell.
Dewey Blackwell, okay.
Dewey Blackwell, and he has he does have a truck driving girlfriend who's African American, and I let her homestead be in Shermantown, which is part of Stone Mountain.
Okay.
I live a little outside of the city of Stone Mountain, but the actual city actually has an area called Shermantown. And I did an interview with a woman who has lived, her family has lived there for many, many years. And she told me a very interesting story about the KKK used to park in there and walk up the mountain to burn crosses and have their meetings back in the day, you know, 40s, 50s. And she told this story of sitting on the porch with her grandfather who had a shotgun beside him, and a guy came up with the robe over his arm and asked if he could borrow some water because he was having trouble with his vehicle. And I guess they had one of those faucet spouts outside. And said, I'd be glad to pay you. And the grandfather said, just go ahead and take the water, that's fine. But anyway, can you imagine sitting on the porch and seeing these men in white robes walk up the mountain to have their racist meeting, white supremacist meeting. But anyway, so I did a lot of research, needless to say. On all my books, I do a lot of research, but those kind of stories enrich it, enrich the quality of the writing, because I have actual stories to back up what I'm writing about.
Those stories are just wonderful. And you mentioned about research. Do you do, how many hours of research per book do you think you do?
Oh, I don't know, because I can get so into it that I gotta make myself go back and write. I have probably a third of a book done called Boston Mountains that I'm probably gonna start working on soon. And it's a historical novel, and it's set in Arkansas. And I didn't realize I had relatives that had come from Arkansas and then gone up to Webb City, Missouri. And when I took a trip to check out different areas, because Fort Smith was one of the locations that, you know, in the 1800s would have been a hub, what you would have called almost a city. And so I went through Fort Smith, and I had my route all, you know, because I wanted to do a little genealogy work as I was going along. But yeah, it's fascinating to find out how long it takes for one generation to get a little bit more education, and then the next generation and the next generation. But to answer you as far as how much research, it's ongoing. It's like, it becomes part of the fabric of every day, you know, because something maybe like Fort Smith was never on my radar before. But now anything about Fort Smith, I'm, you know, listening, picking up the book, I'm reading this, you know.
Well, so, I mean, I hear this from writers all the time, and I can tell you from my own experience, I don't really have a writing problem. I have a research problem. They say the first step is recognizing that you have a problem. I could get so carried away in research, and I suspect many writers are the same, you know. I just love when I get on a trail of learning about something, you know.
Yeah, I learned about Bass Reeves, who was the first African-American sheriff in the United States. And he was this heroic figure who arrested thousands, you know, of criminals by himself because he didn't have, you know, he wasn't accepted by the other sheriffs. And this guy who was a real good shot and, you know, had to be very brave. Anyway, the character is just absolutely fascinating. So he's kind of a walk-on character in this book that I'm developing for that. But you know, I guess I spent probably a week just, you know, going through all of his history and who he was. I was just, and I'm still fascinated by him. I think there's a new movie out with him as the main character, by the way.
And what's his name again? Bass?
It's Bass. It's Bass. Yeah.
Okay. So if anybody wants to look him up or look for the movie, you wouldn't know the name of the movie that's coming out, would you?
You know, I have it on my Facebook because I watched it, but you know, I can't pull it out of my head.
Maybe you could email it to me later. I'd like to know. Yeah.
Okay.
I definitely would look for it. These things are just so fascinating. You know, Lynn, it's just such a pleasure to meet you. I really appreciate having you on. Thank you so much.
You are welcome, and it was just a joy to talk to you.
And don't forget, I'm going to be looking for your handwork.
Okay, and I hope to have a new book out, A Matter of Respect, which is the sequel to Well of Rage.
A Matter of Respect. And when is that coming out?
Well, I've got to get a publisher or an agent first, but I have a few leads, and we'll see what happens. You know, I'm hoping soon.
Okay, well, your topics are really timely. So I hope that the agents out there can pick up on that and get moving on it, because I know you're going to have readers for sure.
By the way, it got second place in the Southeastern Writers Association Best Novel.
Okay, well, that's wonderful. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lynn. We want to thank Lynn Hesse for joining us today and talking to us about these very serious issues and shedding a little more light through her work and through her discussion of these issues. And as always, I'd like to thank Ted Carrick for the wonderful music titled Eyes of Gold, and we hope to see you next week.
Dusty road, a man alone. His vital signs go on hold, and I don't know what you've been told, but the years have turned my eyes gold. told you what you told me, we'd never be in the same boat for free. Yet it rides